Can you imagine walking into a grocery store and seeing the strange 1900s items you won't find today? Back then, shelves were filled with wild experiments, glowing tonics, canned curiosities, and miracle foods that promised everything from health to happiness. How did something so inventive and so bizarre completely disappear? Back in the early 1900s, parents swore by a little bottle that promised peace and quiet in just a few drops. It was called soothing syrup, and it was advertised as the perfect way to calm fussy infants. The secret ingredient? A generous dose of morphine mixed with alcohol. Mothers genuinely believed they were helping their babies rest, not realizing they were giving them a narcotic strong enough to knock out an adult. The syrup was so trusted that doctors and midwives often recommended it without hesitation, calling it a miracle for motherhood in newspaper ads. The advertisements showed happy babies sleeping soundly and smiling mothers praising the product, but behind that image was a chilling truth. Thousands of infants were slowly poisoned, and doctors eventually sounded the alarm when addiction and death rates began to rise. The syrup was quietly pulled from shelves, but for years it was seen as an essential household item. Looking back, it shows just how far people would go for a little piece, and how easily trust could be bought with clever words and pretty labels. Imagine walking into your local pharmacy and being told the cure for your toothache was a drop of cocaine. That was the reality for countless Americans in the early 1900s. Cocaine toothache drops came in tiny glass bottles and promised instant relief. And they delivered, but not in the way people expected. The numbing effect was real, but so was the rush that followed. Parents would even give it to their children, thinking it was a harmless medicine for dental pain. One advertisement proudly claimed it was recommended by physicians everywhere, showing smiling children holding the bottle like candy. The packaging looked elegant, trustworthy, and medical, often decorated with gold lettering and fancy claims about purity. In truth, it was a dangerous stimulant being handed out over the counter. Before long, addiction and bizarre behavior became common side effects. When doctors began realizing the drug's powerful and destructive nature, the government stepped in. By then, though, the damage was done. It was one of the most shocking reminders that what is sold as medicine can sometimes be anything but healing. In the early 20th century, people were obsessed with the idea of energy, vitality, and youth. So when scientists discovered radium, the glowing element that seemed almost magical, it was not long before someone decided to bottle it. Radium water tonics were marketed as life renewers, claiming to boost stamina, cure fatigue, and even restore sexual vitality. The bottles glowed faintly in the dark, and people took that as proof of their power. Restaurants and spas even began offering radium treatments, serving glowing water and soups as symbols of luxury and progress. Wealthy men drank them daily, believing they were harnessing the future of science. The truth, of course, was far darker. Those radiant bottles contained deadly radioactivity that slowly poisoned their loyal customers from the inside out. One famous case involved a rich industrialist who drank so much radium water that his bones literally crumbled. By the time the dangers of radiation became known, it was too late for many. What began as a promise of eternal youth ended as one of history's deadliest health fads. Beauty in the early 1900s came with a price, and sometimes that price was your life. Arsenic complexion wafers were delicate little candies sold to women who wanted fair, flawless skin. They were marketed as the secret of porcelain beauty, claiming to refine the complexion, remove freckles, and create a soft glow. The active ingredient, arsenic, was one of the most lethal poisons known to man. Yet, elegant ads and society endorsements made it seem fashionable, even sophisticated. Some companies even held beauty contests where contestants proudly credited their clear white skin to the wafers. Women ate them daily, unaware that the poison was slowly building in their systems. Symptoms like fatigue, nausea, and hair loss were dismissed as the price of beauty. By the time doctors connected the dots, countless lives had already been shortened in the pursuit of perfection. It is a haunting reminder of how the beauty industry has always known how to sell a dream, even when that dream comes laced with death. Before modern refrigeration, keeping milk fresh was a constant battle. So when companies started selling a clear liquid that could preserve milk for days, people thought it was a miracle. That liquid was formaldehyde, the same chemical now used to preserve dead bodies. At the time, nobody fully understood how toxic it was. Dairies would pour it straight into milk to stop it from spoiling on long delivery routes, and families unknowingly served it to their children every morning. Some milk producers even advertised it as purified dairy, proudly boasting of its extended freshness without realizing the slow harm it caused. The milk looked normal, smelled normal, and even tasted normal, but it was quietly poisoning entire communities. Reports of sudden illness and child deaths eventually led to public outrage, and government officials stepped in to ban its use. The scandal helped inspire the first real food safety regulations in the United States. It is unsettling to think that something as innocent as a glass of milk once carried the same chemical used in a morgue. There was a time when a bottle of syrup on the kitchen shelf could fix nearly anything, or so people thought. Dr. Caldwell's syrup pepsin was one of the most beloved remedies of the early 20th century, sold as a gentle laxative for both adults and children. The label claimed it was made from natural ingredients and was as pleasant as maple syrup. In reality, it packed a serious punch. It worked, perhaps too well, and people became dependent on it for even the slightest discomfort. The sweetness made it easy for children to take, and that only helped sales grow. Families would pass bottles down like heirlooms, believing it was an essential cure for every household ailment. Radio ads and newspaper testimonials turned it into a household name. Dr. Caldwell himself became a celebrity, known for selling a product that every family trusted. But overuse led to stomach issues and dehydration that few understood. It is one of those curious relics from a time when medicine was more about trust and taste than actual science. If you were a child in the early 1900s, you might have been tricked into eating something that tasted like sweet fish. Cod liver oil candy was the sneaky solution parents used to make sure their kids got their vitamins. The candy looked like toffee or fudge and was sold as a delicious health treat. What most kids did not realize was that every piece was filled with cod liver oil, thick, pungent, and distinctly fishy. Manufacturers claimed it would strengthen bones, sharpen the mind, and keep children safe from illness. School teachers often kept jars of it in classrooms, handing out pieces as healthy rewards for good behavior. In truth, it was mostly an unpleasant mix of sugar and oil that often left kids queasy. Still, desperate parents kept buying it, convinced it was better than forcing down spoonfuls of oil. While it did contain valuable nutrients like vitamin D, it was far from the sweet indulgence it claimed to be. Childhood health in the early 1900s came with a flavor few could forget. When tomato shortages hit the early 20th century, American inventors turned to something unexpected: bananas. The result was banana-flavored catsup, a sweet, tangy sauce meant to replace traditional ketchup. It was popular in parts of the country where tomatoes were hard to grow, and many households actually preferred it. The texture was smooth, the flavor mild, and the color a golden yellow that looked oddly cheerful on a dinner table. Companies marketed it as a tropical twist that went perfectly with meats and sandwiches. Restaurants even served it alongside fried fish and pork, praising it as a modern taste of the islands. It became a staple during times of scarcity, especially in war years when imported goods were limited. But once tomatoes became widely available again, banana catsup vanished almost overnight. A few recipes survived in old community cookbooks, but most people never looked back. It is one of those forgotten experiments that proves just how inventive and strange early 20th century food culture could be. Long before frozen dinners and fast food buckets, canned fried chicken was considered a marvel of convenience. Companies packed fully cooked pieces of chicken in thick lard, sealed them in tins, and sold them as ready-to-eat meals. All you had to do was open the can, warm it up, and serve. For families without refrigeration, it was revolutionary. The advertisements promised crispy flavor that never fades, though in reality, the meat was soggy and greasy. Many families described the experience as like eating cold leftovers from a picnic you forgot about last week. Still, it sold surprisingly well during the Great Depression, when people valued anything that could last months on a shelf. Soldiers and travelers loved it too, even if the taste left something to be desired. Once refrigeration became common, canned fried chicken quickly disappeared, remembered more as a curious experiment than a culinary success. It was a glimpse into a time when practicality mattered more than flavor, and innovation often came with a side of regret. There was a time when strength came in a small brown pill made from dried beef blood. These tablets were sold as meat vitamins, promising to build muscle, cure fatigue, and give pale people a healthy glow. In the 1900s, anemia and malnutrition were common, and the idea of concentrated animal protein sounded like cutting-edge science. The tablets were cheap, compact, and easy to find at pharmacies. Advertisements claimed they contained the vitality of fresh meat in every dose. What they did not mention was that they were made from slaughterhouse byproducts, dried and powdered with minimal sanitation. The taste was metallic and bitter, but people pushed through, believing they were doing their bodies good. They were especially marketed to women, workers, and the elderly, anyone seen as needing extra energy. As nutrition science advanced, it became clear that these tablets offered little more than false hope and a bad aftertaste. Still, they perfectly capture that strange period in history when medicine and marketing often shared the same bloodline. In the early 1900s, nothing said sophistication quite like a bowl of turtle soup. Restaurants and upper-class homes treated it as a status symbol, a dish served to guests with pride and ceremony. When canned food became popular, companies jumped at the chance to make it accessible to everyone. Condensed turtle soup hit grocery shelves in neat metal tins, promising the same luxury without the effort. The label often boasted of real turtle meat and bones simmered to perfection. And yes, it was real, made from freshwater turtles boiled down into a rich, gelatinous broth. The flavor was earthy and gamey, often compared to a mix of chicken and fish. For a while, it was a dinner party staple. But as conservation laws changed and turtle populations declined, the dish fell out of favor. The idea of eating turtle became distasteful to modern sensibilities, and by mid-century, the cans quietly disappeared. Still, it stands as a reminder of how extravagance used to come in the strangest of forms, even from a reptile swimming in your local pond. Long before powdered eggs and refrigerated cartons, there was something far stranger sitting on store shelves: tinned whole eggs. Factories would crack dozens of fresh eggs, whisk them together into a yellow slurry, and seal them in cans for easy cooking. Housewives loved the promise of convenience. No more cracking, no more waste, and supposedly no more spoilage. But the reality was less than appetizing. Once opened, the smell was enough to clear a room. The texture was thick, rubbery, and unnervingly artificial. Still, during wartime shortages, people bought them by the case. They used the canned mixture for baking, omelets, and even scrambled eggs when fresh ones were impossible to find. It was food born of necessity, not desire. When refrigeration became common and supply chains improved, tinned eggs quickly lost their place in the pantry. Today, even reading about them is enough to make most people's stomachs turn. It is one of those inventions that proves convenience sometimes comes at the cost of appetite. Picture this. You have a cough that just will not quit, and the pharmacist slides you a bottle of syrup made from snails. That was not a joke. It was a genuine treatment in the early 1900s. Known as snail syrup, it contained mucus extract from garden snails, thickened with sugar and flavored with herbs. Doctors believed it soothed the throat, healed the lungs, and eased tuberculosis symptoms. The reasoning was that snail mucus had natural anti-inflammatory properties, and oddly enough, they were partly right. The syrup was said to coat the throat in a healing film, though many could barely stomach the texture. Children were the main targets of the marketing, since coughs were common and parents trusted anything labeled natural. The bottles looked elegant, the branding almost poetic. Images of serene countryside gardens and healthy, rosy-cheeked children. But most of those bottles sat half-finished. because few could handle more than one spoonful. While snail-based medicine may sound absurd now, it reflects an era when nature and science blended in the most unexpected, slimy ways. In the early 1900s, eggs were a household treasure, but keeping them fresh was a constant battle. Enter the egg-preserving liquid, a chemical mixture sold in glass jars that promised to make eggs last for months. The instructions were simple: soak the eggs in the solution, seal them, and forget about them until needed. The liquid often contained ingredients like sodium silicate, known as water glass, which formed a thin protective coating over the shell. The process became something of a ritual in many homes, with families gathering on weekends to dip dozens of eggs into the mysterious solution. Children often watched with fascination, unaware that their science experiment would later decide whether breakfast was safe or spoiled. On paper, it worked wonders. In practice, it was unpredictable. If the balance was even slightly off, the eggs absorbed the chemicals, turning rubbery and inedible. Some families reported strange flavors or odors, and others ended up with full batches spoiled anyway. Yet for rural households without refrigeration, it was worth the risk. Advertisements claimed it could make spring eggs last through winter, and that promise kept it selling for decades. The idea of soaking breakfast in chemicals sounds bizarre now, but for people back then, it was just another clever fix in the never-ending battle against time and spoilage. There was a time when smoking was considered elegant, and nowhere was that more apparent than in the case of violet cigarettes. Packaged in delicate lavender boxes with gold lettering, these cigarettes were marketed specifically to women. They were scented with crushed violet petals and other floral essences to give off a sweet aroma rather than the harsh smell of tobacco. The ads called them feminine, refreshing, and refined. Perfume companies even partnered with tobacco brands to create matching fragrances so a woman's scent would linger long after she finished her smoke. At social gatherings, the faint violet aroma became a symbol of sophistication, a kind of floral signature in the air. Socialites and actresses were often pictured with them in hand, exhaling perfumed smoke like it was part of a beauty ritual. In reality, they were just as addictive and dangerous as any other cigarette. The floral scent did nothing to mask the health risks that came with every puff. But for a short while, they symbolized glamour and rebellion, a way for women to stand out in a world still defining what femininity should look like. Eventually, as health concerns rose and tastes changed, the violet cigarette faded into history, leaving behind only the faint memory of flowers mixed with smoke. Convenience was everything in the early 20th century, and few things embodied that better, or worse, than sardine paste tubes. These metal tubes looked like toothpaste containers, but held a thick, salty spread made from mashed sardines. The idea was brilliant for travelers and picnickers. Easy to carry, no can opener needed, and instantly ready for bread or crackers. The problem was the smell. Once opened, the tube released an oceanic blast strong enough to make eyes water. Children joked that it was fish in a tube and dared each other to squeeze some onto crackers at school lunches. In boarding houses and campgrounds, it was both a quick meal and an unintentional way to clear a room in seconds. Still, it became popular in Europe and parts of America as a quick protein source. Ads proudly declared it the fisherman's gift to the modern table. It was especially handy during war years when fresh fish was hard to come by. But as refrigeration and better packaging came along, sardine paste lost its charm. It was messy, pungent, and nearly impossible to reseal. Nowadays, the thought of squeezing fish from a metal tube feels more like a prank than a meal. The early 1900s were full of novelty items, and bacon-flavored soap was one of the strangest. It was exactly what it sounds like, a bar of soap designed to smell like sizzling bacon. Advertisers claimed it gave the comforting aroma of breakfast while leaving your hands soft and clean. The idea was that housewives could bring a touch of homey warmth to their kitchens even while washing up. Some companies even produced bacon-shaped bars that came wrapped in paper resembling butcher's parchment. The first whiff out of the package was said to make people hungry, which probably was not ideal when all you wanted was clean hands. Some even claimed the scent lingered on your skin, which supposedly made it pleasantly familiar. In reality, it was an oily mix of fat and artificial fragrance that made homes smell like greasy diners. Most buyers tried it once for the novelty, then quietly went back to lavender and lemon scents. It never became a mainstream hit, but it showed how obsessed people were with turning comfort foods into lifestyle trends. In hindsight, it is hard not to laugh at the thought of people scrubbing their hands and thinking, "Now that's the smell of breakfast." Soap-flavored gum. You heard that right. There was a time when gum tasted like soap. Marketed as a clean mouth product for children, soap-flavored chewing gum promised to keep kids' breath fresh and their teeth tidy. It was usually pink or white, wrapped in pastel paper that made it look innocent enough. The problem was the flavor. It was sharp, bitter, and unmistakably soapy, like chewing on a bar of lye-based cleanser. Some children would spit it out immediately, while others insisted on blowing bubbles just to prove they could handle the taste. Candy shops kept it in a separate jar, warning new customers that it was not for the faint of heart. Still, some children grew to like it, claiming it was refreshing and unique. Parents bought it because it seemed like a healthier alternative to sugary sweets. The gum even had slogans like "sweetness without sin" and "clean teeth, clean taste." It is hard to imagine that working today, but back then, cleanliness was everything. The strange little treat eventually vanished from stores, though a few nostalgic candy makers have revived it for novelty's sake. For anyone curious enough to try, just know, it tastes exactly how you think it does. The 1900s were full of experimental sodas, but few were as puzzling as horseradish cream soda. It started as a daring flavor in small-town pharmacies where soda fountains mixed medicine with refreshment. Someone decided that the sharp spice of horseradish might pair well with the sweetness of cream and carbonation. The result was interesting. The drink gave an instant kick to the nose and left a burning aftertaste that confused more than refreshed. Some adventurous pharmacists even mixed it with chocolate syrup or cherry flavoring, claiming it created a bold and lively tonic. One reporter from a small Illinois paper described it as like drinking fire through a straw, which somehow only made people more curious to try it. Advertisements called it invigorating and digestive, claiming it could cure fatigue and settle the stomach. In reality, most people who tried it only did so once. Still, it had a small but loyal following among those who loved adventurous flavors. The fad fizzled out quickly, as more pleasant options like root beer and orange soda took over. Today, it lives on as one of those forgotten oddities, proof that curiosity has always been the mother of questionable inventions. At the turn of the 20th century, asbestos was hailed as a miracle material. It was strong, flexible, and nearly fireproof, everything a homemaker could want in a baking sheet. Companies began lining cookware with asbestos fibers, promising perfect heat distribution and no more burnt edges. The ads called it the safest, most modern kitchen innovation. Housewives trusted the science, unaware that asbestos dust could become deadly once inhaled. The fibers slowly broke down under heat, releasing invisible particles into the air and onto food. For decades, people proudly baked bread and pies on what we now recognize as poison. It was not until the mid-20th century that researchers linked asbestos exposure to lung disease and cancer. By then, millions of homes had already used it. The idea of calling asbestos safe for cooking feels unthinkable today. But in its time, it represented the height of progress. Sometimes the greatest dangers are the ones we mistake for innovation. In the age when electricity was still a thrilling new household marvel, inventors were desperate to find ways to bring it into every corner of daily life, even breakfast. That is how the electric cereal heater was born. This strange little device looked like a polished metal bowl with wires sticking out of the sides, marketed as a modern way to electrify your morning oats. Advertisements promised that a mild electric current running through your porridge would stimulate the body, awaken the nerves, and energize the spirit. Some even claimed it could increase vitality and improve digestion by infusing the food with invisible energy. Housewives loved the idea of using electricity for more than just lamps, and magazines featured these shiny gadgets alongside newfangled toasters and electric irons. But there was one major problem: safety. Early models often overheated, sparked, or outright shocked whoever touched the spoon too soon. People laughed it off at first, calling it a jolt of energy to start the day. But hospital records soon told a different story. As electrical safety standards improved, these breakfast contraptions quietly disappeared from catalogs. By the 1930s, they were a memory, filed under the long list of well-intentioned but disastrous inventions. The electric cereal heater remains one of those perfect examples of early 20th century optimism, that boundless belief that a little bit of electricity could make life, and even breakfast, just a little more exciting. Before it became a household name for fighting bad breath, Listerine had a very different job: cleaning floors. In the late 1800s and early 1900s, it was marketed as an all-purpose antiseptic for hospitals, homes, and barbershops. The formula, loaded with alcohol and essential oils, was praised as a miracle germ killer. Housewives poured it into buckets of water to mop their kitchens, while doctors used it to sterilize surgical tools. It was even sold as a wound disinfectant and dandruff treatment. The name Listerine carried a scientific elegance derived from the English surgeon Joseph Lister, who pioneered antiseptic surgery. But it was not until the 1920s that a clever marketing campaign changed its destiny. The company realized it could tap into a new kind of fear, the fear of bad breath. Ads called halitosis a social disease and suggested that Listerine could cure it. Overnight, a floor cleaner became a personal hygiene essential. Sales skyrocketed, and its grimy past was quietly forgotten. It is almost absurd to think that the same liquid once used to scrub away dirt and mop hospital floors would later be swished in people's mouths as part of their morning routine. The transformation of Listerine is one of the most striking examples of how advertising can completely reinvent a product and how trust can shift as quickly as a label does. Of all the strange foods to come out of the early 1900s, few caused as much confusion as dried cow udder jerky. Sold under names like beef delicacy strips or milk muscle snacks, it was exactly what the label implied: sliced, dried cow udders. The idea was simple: waste nothing. In the days when every part of an animal was used, the udders were cleaned, boiled, seasoned, and dehydrated into chewy strips. The texture was tough and rubbery, somewhere between leather and gristle, but people claimed it was nutritious and packed with protein. Rural communities and butchers marketed it as a farmer's snack, something hearty and long-lasting for work in the fields. Ads described it as a rich, meaty treat from nature's own kitchen. However, city dwellers were less enthusiastic. Many were horrified when they learned what they were eating, having mistaken it for standard beef jerky. Reports spread of people feeling tricked, and eventually the product gained an unfortunate reputation as cow teat jerky. Over time, the novelty faded, replaced by more palatable forms of dried meat. Still, it is a curious relic from a time when thrift ruled the kitchen, and creativity, however questionable, was a badge of honor. It might sound unappetizing today, but it perfectly captures the early 20th century spirit. Waste nothing, use everything, and eat with gratitude, even if it once gave milk. In an age before strict labeling laws, even a simple printing error could turn into a disaster. One of the most infamous examples came from a mix-up between a candy manufacturer and a shoe polish company in the early 1900s. Both used nearly identical metal tins and sourced packaging from the same supplier. One small labeling error meant that a batch of dark, glossy shoe polish was shipped out under the candy brand's name. The tins were placed right on grocery shelves beside real sweets, their shiny labels proudly declaring chocolate drops. Families bought them for their children, unaware that they were actually purchasing wax and dye meant for leather boots. The tragedy was immediate. Several cases of poisoning were reported, and newspapers quickly picked up the story. Public outrage spread fast, and both companies scrambled to clear their names. The incident pushed lawmakers to start demanding stricter product labeling and separate packaging for consumables and chemicals. It is a grim example of how the growing consumer industry of the early 20th century often valued speed and profit over safety. Though no major candy company would ever recover from such a scandal today, the tale of shoe polish candy serves as a chilling reminder of how trust in packaging once meant everything, and how one small mistake could turn sweetness into poison overnight. When industrialized baby food first hit grocery shelves in the early 1900s, it was marketed as a modern miracle for busy mothers. Companies proudly introduced glass jars filled not with fruits or grains, but with pureed meats. Beef, chicken, lamb, and even veal were mashed into silky pastes and labeled as nourishment for growing strong babies. Parents loved the convenience. No more cooking, chopping, or feeding the baby by hand from the family pot. The jars were sealed tight, easy to store, and supposedly packed with protein. Ads often featured chubby infants smiling with spoons of savory goodness, and doctors endorsed the products as scientifically balanced meals. But the reality was less pleasant. The smell was often rancid, the color gray and unappetizing, and the texture somewhere between pudding and paste. Some varieties even contained small bits of gristle or fat that made babies gag. Yet for families in industrial cities, it felt like progress, science in a jar. Over the decades, these meat purees became a symbol of modern parenting, though many adults who grew up with them remember their taste with horror. Eventually, the trend faded as baby food shifted toward fruits, vegetables, and milder flavors. Still, the idea that someone once spoon-fed a jar of cold veal puree to a crying infant perfectly sums up early 20th century innovation. Equal parts practical, unsettling, and strangely optimistic about what technology could do for a hungry child. Iceboxes were the silent workhorses of the pre-refrigerator era. Made of wood and lined with tin or zinc, these coolers relied on large blocks of ice delivered by the local iceman. Families would carefully store milk, butter, and meat inside, hoping the chill would last until the next delivery. Every summer, children would race to the door when they heard the iceman's wagon, eager for a chip of ice on a hot day. Each delivery was a small event, the iceman hauling the dripping block through the door, leaving puddles that kids would trace with their fingers. Homemakers learned exactly how to stack food to make the cold last, a skill passed down like a family secret. The sound of melting ice and creaking hinges became the steady rhythm of daily life. Managing an icebox took skill. Too warm and the food spoiled, too cold and the milk froze solid. Homemakers learned to balance the temperature like a science. The sound of melting ice dripping into the tray below was as familiar as a ticking clock. When electric refrigerators arrived, the iceboxes faded away, but they left behind the memory of simpler, slower kitchens where cold was a daily luxury. Aspartame heavy diet drinks ruled the 1980s like artificial royalty. Every company wanted in on the low-calorie craze, and aspartame was the magic word, sweeter than sugar, with zero guilt. But behind the fizzy slogans and pastel cans was a growing storm of controversy. The commercials made it look glamorous, thin models sipping soda on beaches and boardwalks, living proof that chemistry could be chic. But reports of strange side effects, headaches, nausea, dizziness, began to spread. Health watchdogs accused companies of putting profit before safety, and suddenly, 0 calories didn't sound so refreshing. Reports of headaches, dizziness, and long-term health concerns turned the miracle sweetener into a national debate. Diet sodas that once promised vitality suddenly felt toxic, their ingredients lists sounding more like chemistry homework than refreshment. Regulators scrambled, companies reformulated, and loyal fans were left wondering if their favorite drinks were safe or secretly sinister. By the end of the decade, aspartame was under tighter scrutiny, forcing soda makers to reinvent themselves again. For those who remember the first wave of diet drinks, it was an era defined by blind faith in science and the rude awakening that followed. Space food sticks were supposed to make you feel like an astronaut, but most people felt more like hostages to bad taste. Marketed as the food of the future, These chewy, tube-shaped snacks promised energy, convenience, and space-age nutrition. In reality, they were rubbery chocolate glue wrapped in foil, sticking to your teeth and your soul in equal measure. The packaging screamed adventure, but the flavor whispered punishment. They were dense enough to survive re-entry, yet fragile enough to crumble into brown dust if left in the sun. Parents kept buying them because kids loved the NASA tie-in, not because anyone actually wanted to eat them. It was the only snack that could make both astronauts and children question their life choices. They came in flavors like caramel, peanut butter, and chocolate, though none resembled anything found on Earth. Kids begged their parents for them, imagining themselves floating in zero gravity, only to realize astronauts probably ate better than this. The ads showed smiling families pretending this was adventure food, but in every kitchen, the reaction was the same: confusion, then regret. The texture was somewhere between an eraser and a protein bar that lost its will to live. They disappeared by the 1980s, only to return decades later as a nostalgia novelty. Because apparently, even bad memories can make money if you wrap them in silver. Yes, this was real. In the 1950s, novelty stores sold dog smoking kits, designed to teach pets to hold cigarettes in their mouths while exhaling smoke. Advertisements promised endless laughter and party entertainment, complete with instructions and a small clamp to fit over a dog's snout. Crowds gathered at picnics or block parties to watch Fido puff away like a tired office worker. The dogs, of course, had no idea what was happening. The kits didn't hurt them directly, but secondhand smoke and sheer indignity probably didn't help. Even by mid-century standards, it was surreal, a nation so charmed by smoke that it tried to share it with its pets. These were the years when fun often meant forgetting the line between novelty and nonsense. It was the decade's most surreal expression of human boredom, proof that if people could make something smoke, they would. The craze faded as quickly as it began, but the photos still haunt history books. Smiling families, tail-wagging pets, and a cloud of absurdity no one seemed to notice. In the 1950s, even man's best friend couldn't escape humanity's worst ideas. Jell-O gelatin molds turned every dessert table into a display of edible architecture. Bright, colorful, and a little bizarre, they were the showpieces of mid-century kitchens. Every family had a favorite combination: pineapple chunks, marshmallows, even shredded carrots suspended in translucent wobbling towers. Jell-O wasn't just food, it was performance. Mothers took pride in their molds, comparing layers and colors like painters admiring canvases. When that dessert wobbled onto the table, it wasn't just dessert, it was applause for creativity disguised as dinner. It represented control over nature itself. Sweetness, color, and texture, all perfectly contained in a shimmering mold. For housewives, it was creativity made visible, proof that the home could still be an art form. The sound of that wobbly jiggle at dinner parties became a symbol of pride, the centerpiece of gatherings from church socials to Christmas dinners. It photographed beautifully, tasted nostalgic, and looked futuristic. Kids loved its bounce. Adults admired its precision. Jell-O made dessert something both playful and sophisticated. In a decade obsessed with presentation and perfection, it captured the exact balance between science and showmanship. Every mold was a small, sweet victory for the modern homemaker. Toaster forks were the simplest way to make toast before toasters ever hummed on countertops. Picture a long, polished metal fork with a piece of bread skewered at the end, held carefully over a stove flame. It was slow, smoky, and required absolute attention. Burn it for a second too long, and breakfast turned to charcoal. Many people swore the smoky, uneven crisp of a fork-toasted slice tasted better than anything an electric toaster could make. The smell alone could pull half-asleep children from their beds faster than any alarm clock. Still, there was something oddly peaceful about standing over the stove, watching the edges of the bread curl and darken, the smell filling the kitchen like comfort itself. People learned to judge the perfect toast by sight and instinct alone. Children would beg for turns, waving their bread too close to the flame while their mothers scolded them with a smile. The results weren't always even, but they were personal, each slice a reflection of its maker's patience. In an era when every meal was an act of care, a toaster fork turned something as simple as bread into a ritual. Today, these little tools look almost primitive, but back then they were elegance in motion, grace found in the glow of a blue stove flame. 3D Doritos, original formula, were snack evolution taken too far. Crunchy, puffed Doritos shaped like tiny shells of doom. Marketed as next-level snacking, they were fried in oil-heavy formulas that made them dangerously addictive, and later, questionable in the eyes of regulators. Each bite exploded with flavor dust and grease, leaving fingerprints that could identify you for days. Kids loved the sound they made, that loud, hollow crunch that echoed like fireworks. Parents hated the oil stains left on furniture, walls, and jeans. Health officials hated them even more when lab tests showed oil saturation levels bordering on hazardous. People loved the crunch, but their stomachs didn't always agree. Complaints about the oils used pushed the snack into the FDA's spotlight. For a while, 3D Doritos became the stuff of playground legend, the chip that bit back. By the early 2000s, they vanished, quietly replaced by safer and less greasy iterations. They returned years later, reformulated and rebranded, but the original remains a myth among snack enthusiasts, proof that sometimes the future of food is a little too oily to handle. Tuna noodle loaf mix was the Frankenstein's monster of mid-century meal kits. Inside the box was powdered sauce, dried noodles, and a mysterious gelatin binder that turned dinner into a wiggling block of horror. Add canned tuna and water, and voila, a loaf that looked alive and smelled dead. It wobbled on the plate like it was trying to escape, oozing grayish liquid from its sides. Kids stared at it in fear. Parents pretended it was innovative, and even cats circled it suspiciously. Some households gave up halfway and called it soup instead. It still wasn't edible. The gelatin made it both dry and wet at the same time, a texture only nightmares could describe. It jiggled when it shouldn't have, squeaked when sliced, and somehow managed to taste both fishy and flavorless. Families across America tried to eat it politely, but even the dog walked away. The company behind it called it a wholesome family dinner. History called it culinary trauma. The 1970s produced many bad ideas, but this one defied physics, taste, and mercy. Tuna noodle loaf mix was proof that some foods should remain mysteries. Of all the 1950s food inventions, canned bread might be the strangest, and somehow the most practical. It came in shiny tins that promised freshness preserved for years. The dough was baked directly inside the can, resulting in a dense brown loaf that slid out like a sponge. It was oddly satisfying to open, and surprisingly edible with enough butter or jam. Advertisers pitched it as the future of convenience, perfect for camping, lunchboxes, and the inevitable nuclear apocalypse. Families loved it because it felt both comforting and futuristic, a loaf built to survive anything, even the end of the world. It was proof that America's appetite for innovation extended all the way to its pantry shelves. Housewives stocked it next to canned peaches and Spam, proud of their preparedness. It was comfort food with a metal edge, part bakery, part bunker ration. The taste? Sweet, slightly metallic, and unforgettably weird. Canned bread captured the contradictions of the era perfectly, optimistic, paranoid, and determined to can everything, even tradition. It's still made in small corners of New England today, but as a curiosity, not a comfort. Back then, though, it was survival you could slice. Electric percolator coffee pots were the morning heartbeat of 1940s kitchens. Chrome-bodied and graceful, they gurgled and hissed as they brewed, the rich aroma of coffee filling every corner of the home. Inside, water bubbled up through a central stem and dripped through the grounds in a slow, steady rhythm. Families would often pause mid-conversation to listen for that familiar gurgle. It meant the day was officially beginning. The smell of percolated coffee and fresh toast became the scent of peace returning after years of uncertainty. That rhythmic sputter was the sound of comfort, the promise of warmth before the day's work began. Housewives polished their percolators like silver trophies, proud of their modern convenience. Coffee made this way was strong, dark, and sometimes slightly bitter, but people loved it that way. The glass knobs on top allowed you to watch the color deepen, a small daily performance in stainless steel. Many soldiers returning home from war said the sound of percolating coffee reminded them of peace. Even as drip machines took over later decades, few gadgets ever captured the same mix of beauty and ritual. That steady gurgle wasn't just the sound of brewing, it was the sound of normal life returning. High-sodium frozen dinners were the guilty comfort of 1980s convenience culture. Every brand from Swanson to Banquet filled freezer aisles with Salisbury steak, mashed potatoes, and gravy that could outlast the apocalypse. They were fast, cheap, and dependable, the perfect meal for anyone too tired to cook after a long day. The downside? Each tray contained more salt than an ocean wave. Doctors began linking them to hypertension and heart disease, and suddenly, convenience looked like a killer. What started as a quick dinner fix turned into a health crisis on a plate. The sodium levels weren't just high, they were astronomical, often topping 2,000 milligrams in a single meal. Nutritionists joked that a Swanson dinner was less food and more brine in a box. The FDA's evolving nutritional guidelines in the late 1980s forced companies to pull or reformulate entire product lines. The old recipes disappeared, replaced by heart-healthy versions that never quite tasted the same. For people who grew up on them, it felt like losing a piece of home, the salty, buttery kind. Frozen dinners didn't die, they just got watered down, literally and figuratively. But those who remember the originals can still taste that sodium-soaked nostalgia and the guilt that came with every delicious bite. Post-corn Toasties cereal was the great imposter of breakfast aisles, a knockoff so blatant it could only have been made in the 1970s. Trying to ride the coattails of Kellogg's Corn Flakes, Post created something that looked the same but tasted like regret and cardboard dust. The box screamed sunshine and happiness, but the cereal inside was as joyless as dry paper. Each flake disintegrated the moment milk touched it, turning into a soggy film that clung to the spoon like glue. The smell was faintly burnt, as if even the factory gave up halfway through. Parents bought it thinking they'd save a few cents. Kids refused it like medicine. Even sugar couldn't fix it. No matter how much you poured, it still tasted like broken promises. Post claimed their cereal was wholesome, crispy, and golden. Two of those words were lies, and the third was a stretch. Corn Toasties became a brief symbol of everything wrong with imitation food, a product that tried to be familiar but only reminded you how good the real thing was. It disappeared quietly, leaving behind empty bowls and the taste of defeat. Leave it to the 1950s to find a way to combine infants and industrial design. The glass baby bottle with a metal nipple was marketed as the hygienic choice for modern mothers. It promised durability, style, and the reassuring shine of polished chrome. In practice, it was a dentist's nightmare waiting to happen. Babies were encouraged to suckle from small metal spouts that turned freezing cold in winter and scorching hot in summer. The bottles themselves were heavy, slippery, and prone to shattering at the slightest drop. So basically, perfect for small, uncoordinated hands. Yet the ads were stunning. Rosy-cheeked babies drinking happily while mothers beamed at the future of feeding. Hospitals even endorsed them, believing glass and metal meant cleanliness. Plastic was considered cheap, rubber unsanitary. No one mentioned burns or lacerations. It was the golden age of over-engineering, where even baby care had to look like a rocket launch. Parents wanted sleek, scientific solutions to everything, even if they made no sense. By the end of the decade, common sense won. Soft silicone nipples replaced steel, and bottles became lighter and safer. But for a time, feeding your child looked like refueling a car. Clunky, dangerous, and somehow deeply optimistic. Swanson TV dinners changed the way America ate, literally overnight. Before them, families sat down together at the dining table, but by the mid-1950s, dinner was moving to the living room, served on a metal tray in front of the television. Each frozen meal, turkey, mashed potatoes, peas, and a brownie, felt futuristic, like something out of a science fair. Housewives loved them because they saved time, and children loved them because they felt special, like having a meal made just for them. Swanson's idea came from a surplus of Thanksgiving turkey, and what could have been a disaster turned into a cultural phenomenon. It was the perfect marriage of convenience and novelty, wrapped in shiny aluminum. The television tray soon became as essential as the set itself, transforming mealtime into family entertainment. It was food built for the atomic age, neat, portioned, and just modern enough to feel exciting. For the first time, America could eat and watch together, no mess, no fuss. It was comfort and convenience served hot in 25 minutes flat. The Swanson TV dinner wasn't just food, it was the birth of the modern mealtime, a sign that progress could be eaten with a fork. Hand-cranked egg beaters were a kitchen essential long before electricity became universal. These clever tools used gears and a spinning handle to whip eggs, cream, or batter with surprising efficiency. Housewives prized them for their precision and control, though they required steady hands and strong wrists. For many, the sound of the gears clicking and whirring became part of the morning routine, a mechanical heartbeat of breakfast. Some homemakers claimed they could feel the exact moment the eggs reached the perfect froth, trusting muscle memory over measurement. In some kitchens, the same egg beater was used for decades, its handle worn smooth from years of breakfasts and Sunday cakes. It was craftsmanship made to last, built for a world that believed tools should serve generations, not seasons. Children would often beg to help, turning the handle and watching the blades blur into motion. Despite their simplicity, they represented progress, one step closer to the modern appliances that would transform kitchens in the decades to come. Today, they sit in antique shops as quaint reminders of when cooking was a true hands-on art form. Fruit roll-ups, original recipe, were the ultimate lunchbox upgrade, a sticky sheet of fruit-flavored fun that promised real fruit taste. In reality, it was closer to edible plastic coated in corn syrup. The first generation of fruit roll-ups, launched in the 1980s, came loaded with artificial dyes, synthetic flavors, and enough preservatives to outlast civilization. Kids loved peeling them off wax paper, stretching them into shapes, and pretending they were eating something healthy. Parents convinced themselves they were fruit. The truth? They were sugar sculptures, with a shelf life measured in decades. When health watchdogs started questioning the ingredients, the company quietly reformulated the recipe. Less dye, fewer chemicals, more fruit concentrate. The newer versions looked cleaner but never tasted quite as wild. The original, in all its neon, sticky glory, disappeared, banned by shifting health standards and evolving food laws. But if you remember licking red dye off your fingers in 1985, you were part of an era that mistook chemistry for cuisine. Swanson Great Starts. Breakfast TV dinners were frozen optimism at its frostiest. They came in divided trays featuring scrambled eggs, pancakes, and sausages, all perfectly soggy by the time they hit your plate. The idea was breakfast made easy, but it ended up tasting like Sunday morning regret. The pancakes absorbed the syrup like sponges soaking in despair. The eggs had a rubbery snap that made you question if they were ever eggs at all. Even the sausage, supposedly the star, was gray and flavorless, like breakfast had just given up. The eggs looked like yellow sponges, and the pancakes had the consistency of damp sponges. Even the syrup was trapped in its own compartment, slowly merging into every corner of the tray. The smell alone warned you that no great start was coming. The pancakes were rubbery, the eggs tasted like cardboard, and the syrup managed to be both too thin and too sweet. Even the sausage looked tired, gray, greasy, and spiritually defeated. It was convenience at its most depressing, the kind of meal that made you rethink your entire morning. Swanson had cornered the dinner market, but breakfast proved too fragile to freeze. Great Starts turned into a short-lived joke, a frozen reminder that some things are better made fresh or not at all. Flour sack clothing fabric might sound like desperation, but to 1940s homemakers, It was ingenuity at its finest. During wartime, every scrap of material was precious, and companies began printing colorful floral or striped designs directly onto flour sacks. When the flour was gone, families would wash, bleach, and stitch the soft cotton into dresses, aprons, or curtains. Some women even chose their flour brand based on the prettiest patterns, turning grocery shopping into a hunt for fabric. In small towns, sewing circles would meet just to trade flour sacks, 2 blue blossoms for a pink stripe, a green check for a floral print. Children wore those colors proudly, not knowing their clothes had once held grain instead of thread. What started as thrift became art, a collective effort to keep dignity alive when luxury was a memory. Seamstresses took great pride in transforming humble packaging into Sunday best. Children wore flour sack shirts to school, while mothers matched their aprons to their tablecloths with careful precision. It was recycling before the word existed, born from necessity and creativity. What began as a frugal solution became a fashion statement, one that quietly proved beauty could survive even the hardest times. Sodium cyclamate. Sweeteners were the diet craze before the diet craze. Found in everything from light pudding to slim sodas, cyclamate promised sweet flavor without calories, the holy grail of 1980s food science. People believed in it, companies profited from it, and health agencies panicked over it. It was the decade's answer to indulgence without consequence, and every brand wanted in on the trend. Cafeterias, bakeries, and soda fountains stocked it proudly, certain they were serving the future of healthy sweetness. Then the studies hit: lab rats, cancer scares, and a wave of panic that turned every diet label into a potential danger sign. Early animal studies hinted that the additive might be carcinogenic, and by the mid-1980s, the United States pulled it off the market completely. Europe followed soon after, though a few countries still clung to it for years. Consumers were confused, wondering why yesterday's miracle was suddenly today's poison. The ban forced food companies to scramble for substitutes, giving rise to the aspartame era, a solution that sparked even more controversy. For many 1980s dieters, cyclamate was their first taste of betrayal, a chemical sweetheart that turned out to be a bad relationship. Pizza in a Can by Chef Boyardee was the culinary equivalent of optimism gone wrong. A revolutionary family pizza kit, it promised homemade flavor with the convenience of a can, which should have been the first warning sign. Inside was dough mix, sauce, and cheese powder that smelled like damp cardboard left in the sun. The dough was sticky, the sauce metallic, and the cheese refused to melt no matter how long you baked it. When you finally pulled it from the oven, it looked like regret covered in red paint. Families gathered in excitement for pizza night, only to discover the crust was chewy in the middle and hard enough on the edges to double as roofing material. Even hungry teenagers couldn't pretend to like it. Chef Boyardee advertised it as fun for the whole family, and in a way, they weren't wrong, because everyone laughed at how terrible it was. It was edible only in theory, and memorable only because of how impossible it was to forget. Pizza in a can became a symbol of 1970s food ambition, a time when anything seemed possible, even if it tasted like despair. Powdered soap flakes were the unsung heroes of 1940s laundry day. Before the rise of liquid detergents, these little boxes of flakes were the standard in every household. Housewives would scoop them into wash tubs, stirring the mixture into hot water until a thick foam formed. The scent of soap and steam filled the air, marking the start of hours of scrubbing, wringing, and rinsing. Many women swore by certain brands, claiming one made whites brighter while another was gentler on the skin. Children learned early to keep their hands out of the soapy water, but sometimes ended up covered in bubbles anyway. The chore was endless, but so was the pride when the sheets came out gleaming and sweet-smelling under the sun. Unlike today's automated machines, laundry then was pure labor, and soap flakes were a homemaker's closest ally. Advertisements boasted of whiter whites and pure cleanliness, though many women knew it came at the price of raw, chapped hands. Yet there was pride in those efforts. The smell of fresh linen drying on the line symbolized care and dignity. Powdered flakes may seem primitive now, but in their day they represented progress and perseverance wrapped in a simple cardboard box. Squeeze parquet. Margarine looked like the future of cooking. Smooth, golden, and ready to squirt straight from a bottle. You didn't need a knife, a dish, or even manners. Just aim and squeeze. For busy 1980s households, it was heaven in a bottle. But the dream melted fast. The plastic packaging was made with chemicals that didn't play well with heat, and kitchens tend to get hot. Over time, the bottles began leaching toxins into the margarine, especially when left near stoves or windows. Families started noticing a strange film forming on their food, slick, waxy, and nothing like butter. Laboratory tests later confirmed what everyone feared. The bottles were slowly contaminating their contents. It was the kind of convenience no one wanted anymore. The FDA wasn't impressed. Consumers noticed strange aftertastes, discoloration, and even separation inside the bottle. Parquet scrambled to defend the product, insisting it was safe when used correctly, but the damage was done. By the late 1980s, new safety rules forced the company to retire the original design. It was a reminder that even convenience has limits, especially when your easy squeeze turns into a chemical squeeze. If these bizarre grocery relics made you both laugh and shiver, tell us which one you dare to try in the comments. Tap that like button to keep the curiosity cooking, and subscribe so you never miss another strange slice of history.